You stay away from him!
No, please! Stop it! Leave her alone!
This is your fault!
She was beaten, broken, and bleeding at the bottom of the stairs, not knowing she was the sole heir to a $900 billion dynasty. Every bruise her evil stepmother carved into her skin was a mark left on a girl the world had already written off. A girl who had no idea that her silence was sitting on a throne worth more than most nations. She had nothing, or so she believed. Then came the day she stopped to help a disabled man, a quiet, limping stranger most people walked past without a second glance. And that single act of kindness cracked open a door that had been sealed for years. The disabled man was not a stranger. He was the family lawyer, the one man on earth who had been holding a secret will, waiting, watching, carrying a document so devastating in its contents that the moment it was unsealed, it would erase everything her evil stepmother had built on top of her suffering. The clause he read from that will did not just expose the truth. It ended her, stepmother, completely. But here is what no one is asking. If the family lawyer knew who she was all along, why did he wait until she was pushed down those stairs to finally move? What was written in that secret will that was so powerful it could dismantle a woman who had controlled a $900 billion dynasty for years? And what exactly does ended her completely look like, when everything she stole was never hers to begin with? Her name was Elara Voss, and from the very first day she could remember, she had been made to feel like a mistake. She was 7 years old the first time her stepmother, Viven Voss, told her that her birth had ruined everything. Not with a shout. Not with a slap. Those would come later. It was delivered the way Viven delivered all of her most poisonous things. Quietly, calmly, with a glass of red wine in one hand, and a smile so thin it barely qualified as human. Your mother died, bringing you into this world, Viven had said, crouching down to Elara's eye level with theatrical tenderness. The least you could do is try not to remind your father of that every time he looks at you. Elara had not understood what that meant at 7, but she had felt it, deep in the part of a child that absorbs cruelty before the mind can process it. She had felt it settle into her bones like cold water, and it had never fully left. By the time she was 12, she had learned to make herself small. By 15, she had learned to make herself invisible. The Voss estate was a monument to old money, a sprawling ancestral compound in the hills of northern Connecticut, flanked by iron gates, manicured hedges, and the kind of silence that only exists when wealth has been accumulated over generations. 12 bedrooms, 4 staff quarters, a private library her late father, Edmund Voss, had built specifically for Elara's mother, a woman named Clara, whose portrait had been removed from every wall in the house within 6 months of Vivian's arrival. Elara had one photograph of her mother. She kept it folded inside the lining of her left shoe. It was the only place Viven had never thought to search, because Viven searched everything. She read Elara's journals, and then denied doing so with such convincing outrage that Elara had once apologized to her for the accusation. She listened to Elara's phone calls through the walls of the East Corridor, and then used what she heard to systematically dismantle every friendship Elara tried to form. A quiet word here, a fabricated story there, a carefully placed concern delivered to a parent or a teacher. I'm just worried about her. She's been struggling, emotionally. She says things that aren't always true. It was a campaign, not a personality. It was deliberate, architectural, built to isolate. And it worked. By the time Elara was 17, there was no one left who truly knew her. No friend she could call. No teacher who hadn't been quietly warned. No relative who hadn't been turned, one by one, through the slow machinery of Vivien's charm. Her father, Edmund, had deteriorated rapidly after their marriage. A man who had once been sharp, warm, and fiercely protective of his daughter had slowly become someone Elara barely recognized. Distracted, distant, and dependent on Viven, in ways that felt less like love and more like surrender. The doctors called it early-onset cognitive decline. They had been Vivien's doctors. Elara had once tried to tell him what was happening to her. She had sat across from him in his study on a gray October evening, her hands folded in her lap, and she had said, carefully, quietly, because she had learned that volume frightened him now, "Papa, she hurts me." Edmund had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had looked away. "Viven loves you," he had said. "You're imagining things again, my darling." That was the last time Elara had tried. Edmund Voss died 14 months later. A cardiac event, sudden and clean in his sleep. The estate was sealed within 48 hours. The lawyers, Vivien's lawyers, arrived before the funeral flowers had wilted, and by the time the will was read in the cold, wood-paneled office of a firm Elara had never heard of, everything had been handed to Viven with the kind of legal efficiency that, in hindsight, had felt rehearsed. Elara received nothing, not the house, not the accounts, not even her mother's portrait, which Viven had apparently had appraised and sold to a private collector in Geneva 3 weeks before Edmund's death. The grief counselor Viven hired for Elara lasted 2 sessions before quietly resigning. He left no explanation. Years later, Elara would learn that Viven had paid him to file a report, suggesting Elara was emotionally unstable and prone to fabrication. A document quietly tucked into a file somewhere, a shadow cast over her credibility before she had ever thought to use it. She was 18 years old, parentless, penniless by design, and living in the east wing of a house that no longer legally belonged to her. Tolerated, Viven made clear, only because removing her entirely would look unseemly to the remaining social circle. "You may stay," Viven had told her the morning after the will reading, standing in the doorway of Elara's childhood bedroom in a black silk robe, holding her morning coffee like a scepter. "But you will earn your place here, and you will not embarrass me." What that meant, Elara was about to learn, was far worse than anything that had come before. Because up until that point, Viven had been careful, strategic. She had kept her cruelty deniable, the kind that left no marks, the kind that could always be reframed as concern or discipline or love misunderstood. But with Edmund gone, there was no longer any reason to be careful. And Viven Calloway Voss, freed at last from the performance of a watchful husband, revealed herself completely. The woman beneath the silk and the smiles was something Elara had no word for at 18. She would spend the next 2 years trying to survive her, and surviving Viven Calloway Voss was not a passive thing. It was not the quiet endurance of a girl who simply bowed her head and waited for storms to pass. It was active, exhausting, the kind of survival that required Elara to be alert at every hour, to read the temperature of a room before she entered it, to measure the weight of a silence before she broke it, to calculate the danger in a smile before she trusted it. Because with Viven, the smile was always the warning. The slap came after the smile. The humiliation came after the warmth. The punishment always arrived dressed as something else, as correction, as concern, as a lesson Elara simply needed to learn about the real world. That was how Viven had always operated. But now, without Edmund's presence softening the edges of her nature, there were no more costumes. There was only the machinery beneath, cold, precise, and utterly without mercy. The mornings were the worst. Elara rose before dawn every day, not by choice, but because the sound of Vivien's heels on the marble corridor outside her room at 5:45 in the morning had become a Pavlovian trigger for dread. If Elara was not already dressed, already downstairs, already useful, by the time Viven appeared in the kitchen, there was a price to pay. Not always physical. Sometimes it was the withdrawal of food, a casual, almost bored announcement that the house budget had been reassessed and Elara's meals would be adjusted accordingly. Sometimes it was the public kind of punishment, delivered in front of the estate staff with the theatrical precision of someone who had rehearsed it. "She's lazy," Viven would say to no one in particular, loudly enough for everyone to hear, while Elara stood 3 feet away. "Edmund spoiled her terribly. I'm simply trying to prepare her for a world that won't coddle her the way he did." The staff said nothing. They had learned not to. The ones who had shown Elara kindness in the early days, the housekeeper, Mrs. Albright, who used to leave warm bread outside her door, the groundskeeper, Thomas, who had once given her a seedling to plant in the garden, had all been quietly let go within the first year of Vivien's full control, replaced with people she had vetted personally, people who understood, without being told directly, that their employment depended on their loyalty, and that their loyalty was to one person only. Elara had cried the morning Mrs. Albright left. She had stood at her window and watched the old woman load a single suitcase into a taxi, and she had pressed her hand, flat against the glass, as if she could hold her there. Mrs. Albright had looked up once, just once, and the expression on her face was not goodbye. It was something closer to forgive me, as if she knew exactly what she was leaving Elara to face and had no choice but to leave anyway. That look would stay with Elara for years. It would come back to her, in fact, on the very morning that everything changed, though she could not have known that then, standing at the window, 19 years old and utterly alone. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Mrs. Albright had not simply disappeared into retirement. She had gone, quietly and deliberately, to a man in the city. A man with a limp. A man who had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for exactly the kind of testimony that a loyal housekeeper who had watched everything could provide. But that thread would not pull itself tight for another year. For now, there was only the house. And Viven, and the particular cruelty that Viven had begun to escalate in ways that left marks Elara could no longer hide beneath long sleeves. The stairs incident had not been the first time Viven had used physical force. It had simply been the first time she had miscalculated the audience. 4 months before that November afternoon, Viven had shoved Elara into the edge of the kitchen counter during an argument about a broken serving dish, a dish Elara had not broken, a fact that was entirely irrelevant to Viven, who had needed something to be angry about that morning and had selected Elara the way one selects a tool. The bruise had bloomed purple across Elara's ribcage and stayed for 3 weeks. She had told no one. There was no one to tell. 3 weeks before the stairs, Viven had locked her in the cellar overnight, in November, without heat, because Elara had been seen speaking to a delivery driver for longer than Viven deemed appropriate. The accusation attached to it was as grotesque as it was absurd, but Viven delivered it with such quiet, convincing disgust that Elara had sat in that cold, dark room, and for a horrifying moment wondered if she herself was the problem. That was the most dangerous thing Viven had ever done to her. Not the cold, not the hunger, not even the bruises. It was the moment Elara had almost believed her. Because a bruise heals. A locked door opens eventually. But a girl who has been convinced that her own perception of reality cannot be trusted, that girl is a prisoner, even in an unlocked room. And Viven had been building that prison around Elara since she was 7 years old. One quiet word at a time, one reframed memory at a time, until the walls were so familiar that they felt like the shape of the world itself. It was only later, much later, in the aftermath of everything, that Elara would understand this had been the point all along. Viven had not simply wanted her gone. She had wanted her small, permanently, irreversibly small, because a girl who does not believe in herself cannot fight for what is hers. A girl who doubts her own memory cannot challenge a will. A girl who has been surgically isolated from every person who might have confirmed her reality cannot build a case against the woman who stole her inheritance. Viven had not been raising a stepdaughter. She had been dismantling a threat. The question, the one that would tear through Elara's chest like a blade the moment the family lawyer finally opened that sealed document, was this. What had Viven known about the will, and how long had she known it? Because if she had known from the beginning, if the isolation, the gaslighting, the bruises, the locked cellar, the sold portrait, the falsified medical reports, if all of it had been a calculated strategy to neutralize the one person standing between Viven and $900 billion, then nothing about Edmund's death had been an accident. And that thought, when it finally arrived, would not come quietly. It came on a cold November afternoon, on the pavement outside a coffee shop Elara had slipped away to, on one of the rare mornings Viven had left the estate for a board meeting. It came in the form of a man with a limp and a worn leather briefcase, sitting alone on a bench, struggling in silence. And Elara, who had been taught by pain to recognize the particular dignity of someone trying not to ask for help, stopped. She always stopped. That had been her nature, even after everything Viven had done to punish her for it. It was the one thing she had never managed to kill in herself. And it was the one thing that was about to save her life. The man on the bench was older, perhaps 65, perhaps older still, the way certain people carry age like weather rather than time. His coat was good quality but worn at the elbows. His leather briefcase sat upright beside him on the bench, with the particular care of someone protecting something irreplaceable. His left leg was extended at an uncomfortable angle, and he was attempting, with quiet and increasingly failing dignity, to retrieve a document that had slipped from his briefcase onto the pavement, his body simply refusing to cooperate with the instruction his mind was giving it. No one had stopped. The pavement was busy for a Tuesday morning. People moved the way people move in cities when they have decided, collectively and without discussion, that helplessness is someone else's problem. They flowed around him like water around a stone, seamless, indifferent, and completely without guilt. Elara had taken 4 steps past him before she turned back. She did not think about it. She never thought about it. That was the thing about her nature that Viven had always hated most, that Elara's instinct toward other people's pain was faster than her fear. Faster than the voice in her head that sounded increasingly like Viven, cataloging all the reasons to keep walking. Too slow, too soft, too much. You make yourself a target every time you do this. She crouched down and picked up the document. She did not read it. She simply handed it back. The man looked at her, and something moved across his face that she could not immediately name. It was not surprise. It was not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was part of it. Was the expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific thing for a very long time, and had just watched it arrive precisely on schedule. She did not notice that. Not then. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who had spent decades choosing his words with the care of someone who understood that words, once released, could not be recalled. "You didn't have to stop." "Neither did anyone else," Elara said simply. She straightened and turned to leave. She had already been out of the house for longer than was safe. Vivien's board meeting was scheduled until noon, but Viven had a habit of ending things early when her instincts told her to, and Vivien's instincts, Elara had learned, were disturbingly accurate. "Miss Voss." She stopped. The air around her changed, thickened, in the space between one breath and the next. The city continued its noise around her, but inside that noise, a silence had opened up, the kind of silence that only forms when something enormous is about to shift. She turned slowly. The man was watching her with the same unreadable expression, his document now tucked safely back into the briefcase, his hands resting calmly on his knees. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "I've known your name for a very long time," he said. "I knew your mother's name before that." The word mother hit her the way it always did, not like a wound, but like a door. A door to a room she had never been allowed to enter, nailed shut when she was too young to memorize what was behind it. She felt the photo in her shoe without reaching for it. She had trained herself not to react to that word in public. Viven had taught her that reaction was weakness, and weakness was invitation. But this was different. This man had said it like a key. "Who are you?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a card. Plain, cream-colored, embossed with nothing but a name and a phone number. He held it out and she took it, and the moment her fingers closed around it, she noticed that his hand was trembling slightly. Not from age, from something else. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like long restrained relief. The name on the card was Arthur Graywell. She did not recognize it. She would not understand why she should have recognized it until later that evening, when she slipped away to the estate library and searched the name in the archived records her father had kept in a locked cabinet she had secretly known the combination to since she was 14. The combination was her mother's birthday. Edmund had never changed it. Perhaps he had never wanted to. And there, in a folder so old, its edges had softened to felt. Filed beneath a correspondence tab dated nearly 22 years prior, was a letter signed by Arthur Graywell, Senior Legal Counsel, Graywell and Associates, a letter addressed to her father in the careful, formal language of a man confirming the execution of a private document. The subject line read, "Re. The sealed will of Elara Voss, née Hargrove, secondary provisions." Elara read it 3 times. Then she sat on the library floor in the dark and pressed her mother's photograph against her chest and tried to understand what it meant that her mother, a woman who had died giving birth to her, a woman whose portrait had been sold to a stranger in Geneva, a woman whose name Viven had spent 14 years systematically erasing, had left a will, a separate will, a sealed will, one that had apparently never been read. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the east wing and stared at the ceiling and turned it over and over in her mind. The letter, the card, the man on the bench, the trembling hand, the way he had said her name not like a stranger guessing, but like a man confirming something already known. And the more she turned it, the more a shape began to form in the dark. A shape she could not yet fully see but could feel, the way you feel the presence of a room before your eyes have adjusted to its darkness. Viven had known about her mother's will. She was almost certain of it now. Not because she had proof, not yet, but because. But Vivian's entire architecture of control, the isolation, the gaslighting, the assault on Elara's credibility, the confiscation of her mother's things, the speed with which the estate had been sealed after Edmund's death, all of it made a different kind of sense now. Not the sense of a cruel woman indulging cruelty for its own sake. The sense of a woman systematically eliminating every thread that could unravel her. Elara had not been the target of Vivian's hatred. She had been the target of her fear, and that distinction, small, precise, devastating, changed everything. It also meant that if Viven found out about Arthur Graywell, about the letter in the cabinet, about the card now hidden in the lining of Elara's shoe beside her mother's photograph, there would be consequences of a severity Elara had not yet experienced. She told herself to be careful. She told herself to wait, to think, to be as strategic as Viven had always been, to use patience the way Viven used it, as a weapon. But the next morning arrived with its own intentions entirely. Viven returned from her board meeting not at noon, but at 8:30 in the morning, 2.5 hours early, without warning, her car appearing in the drive like a verdict, while Elara was still in the library. The folder open on the desk in front of her, Arthur Graywell's card in her hand. She heard the front door. She moved fast, closed the folder, replaced it, shut the cabinet. But not fast enough. Not quite. Because Viven, who had the particular predatory gift of sensing disruption in the architecture of her own household, the way some animals sense barometric change before a storm, walked directly to the library. Not the kitchen. Not her bedroom. The library. As if she already knew. She opened the door and stood in the frame, and looked at Elara standing in the center of the room, with nothing in her hands, and nothing on the desk, and nothing obviously out of place. And she smiled. That smile, the thin one, the warning. "You've been in here," Viven said. It was not a question. "I was reading," Elara said. "You were reading," Viven repeated, tasting the words slowly, the way a person tastes something they suspect has been poisoned. Her eyes moved across the room, cataloging, measuring. They landed on the cabinet, rested there one beat too long, then returned to Elara. "You look pale. Did you sleep?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Viven stepped into the room, unhurried, her heels silent on the Persian rug. She stopped 2 feet from Elara and tilted her head with the performance of maternal concern that Elara had long since learned to read as its exact opposite. "You've been sneaking around again, haven't you? Going through things that don't belong to you." "I live here," Elara said. She had not meant to say it. It came from somewhere below strategy, from the place where 2 years of survival had been stacked on, top of 2 years before that, and before that, and before that, a tower of endurance that had been built on a foundation of compressed rage she had never once been permitted to release. Vivien's expression did not change, but her eyes did. Something behind them sharpened, focused, the way the eyes of a person sharpen not when they are surprised, but when they have finally been given the excuse they were looking for. "You live here," Viven said softly, "because I allow you to." What happened next happened quickly. The shove came first, both hands flat against Elara's chest, sudden and forceful enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Elara stumbled backward through the library door into the corridor, her heel catching the edge of the runner, her hand finding the wall, but not holding it. Viven was already moving, already talking, her voice rising in the theatrical register she used for performances she intended the staff to hear. "I want you out of my library. I want you out of my house. I have given you everything, and you repay me by sneaking through my private—" The staircase was directly behind Elara. She did not see it in time. The second shove, harder than the first, deliberate in a way the first could perhaps have been argued away as accident, sent her backward over the top step. The fall was not clean. It was not the cinematic arc of someone falling gracefully in slow motion. It was sudden and percussive, shoulder, hip, elbow. Each impact a different register of pain, the carpet burning her forearm, her head striking the curved banister post, 3 steps from the bottom, with a sound she felt more than heard. and then stillness. She lay at the foot of the staircase and looked up at the ceiling of the entrance hall. That high, ornate ceiling her father had once lifted her toward as a child, her small hands reaching for the plasterwork cherubs as he laughed below her. And the world, tilted at an angle it had never quite held before. Above her, at the top of the stairs, Viven stood perfectly still. Looking down, the expression on her face was not horror. It was not panic. It was not even the thin smile. It was calculation. The cold, quiet arithmetic of a woman determining, in real time, whether what had just happened was a problem or an opportunity. And in the terrible clarity of that moment, lying broken at the bottom of the stairs, blood from her temple tracing a slow line toward the marble floor, her mother's photograph and Arthur Graywell's card still sealed inside the lining of her left shoe, Elara understood something she had spent 20 years being too young, too gaslit, too deliberately diminished to understand. Viven had never been afraid of losing control of her. Viven had been afraid of what Elara would find if she ever found herself. And somewhere in a city office, a man with a limp and a worn leather briefcase and a sealed document that had been waiting for 20 years was already reaching for his phone. He did not lose consciousness. That was the first thing Elara became aware of, that she was still here, still present, still inside her own body despite every instinct telling her to leave it. The pain was extraordinary in its specificity. Her left shoulder throbbed in a register she had never experienced before. Her elbow had taken the third step in a way that made her suspect something had fractured. The side of her head, where it had met the banister post, pulsed with a heat that felt less like pain and more like a second heartbeat, insistent, urgent, impossible to ignore. But she was conscious, and being conscious meant she could still see Viven. Viven, who had not moved from the top of the stairs. Viven, who was still calculating. 30 seconds passed, perhaps 40. Long enough for the calculation to complete. Long enough for Elara to watch the precise moment Viven made her decision and put her mask back on. The cold arithmetic behind her eyes softened, rearranged itself, constructed an expression of alarm so convincing that if Elara had not been watching her from the floor of the entrance hall, if she had not witnessed the calculation that preceded it with her own eyes, she might almost have believed it. Elara. Viven descended the stairs with urgent, measured steps, not running, because running would have been too much, would have broken the performance, and crouched beside her with both hands hovering near Elara's face in the gesture of someone desperately wanting to help, but afraid to cause further injury. Oh God. Oh, you poor thing. I told you about that runner on the landing. I told Edmund for years that carpet was a hazard. Don't move, darling. Don't try to move. The runner on the landing. That was the story. Already constructed, already loading, already being broadcast at a frequency designed to reach the staff member Elara could hear moving in the kitchen corridor. The soft approach of footsteps that had heard the fall and were coming to investigate. The runner on the landing. An accident. A hazard Edmund had failed to address. A tragedy Viven had apparently long anticipated and repeatedly warned against. Elara closed her eyes. Not from pain. From the specific, suffocating exhaustion of watching evil perform itself in real time and being unable to speak loudly enough to stop it. I'll call for a doctor, Viven was saying, her voice calibrated to a trembling that stopped just short of tears. Just short, because tears would have been overdoing it, and Viven never overdid anything. Don't try to speak, just stay still. I have to get up, Elara thought. I have to get up before she controls this completely. She pressed her good hand flat against the marble floor and pushed. The pain was spectacular, white and enormous, flooding her vision at the edges. But she pushed through it, through the edges, through the white, because the alternative was to lie at the bottom of these stairs and let Viven write the next chapter of this story the way she had written every chapter before it. And she had run out of chapters she could afford to lose. She made it to sitting. Then, with a slowness that cost her something she could not yet name, to standing. She stood at the foot of the staircase, bruised, bleeding, one arm held at an angle that suggested the shoulder was worse than fractured, her face a mask of dried blood and composure. And she looked at Viven directly. Viven looked back at her, and for the first time in 20 years, for the very first time in the entire history of their relationship, something moved across Vivien's face that was not performance, not calculation, not the thin smile or the borrowed warmth or the theatrical concern. It was something raw, something she had not intended to show. It looked, in the fraction of a second before she buried it, exactly like fear. Because Elara was standing. She was supposed to be down. The doctor arrived within the hour, not Vivien's doctor, because in the fog of managing the staff and managing the story and managing the performance of the concerned stepmother, Viven had made a single, small, catastrophic error of timing. Elara had made the call first, not to a hospital, not to a friend she did not have, to the number on a cream-colored card that she had not needed to retrieve from her shoe because she had memorized it the night she found the letter, memorized it the way she had memorized her mother's face from the photograph, with the focused desperation of someone preserving the only thing that might save them. She had made the call from the library floor before she had fully stood up, her voice low and even and stripped of everything except the essential facts. "I'm Elara Voss. I am at the estate." She pushed me down the stairs. I found the letter. "I need you to come now." There had been a silence on the other end of the line. Then Arthur Graywell's measured voice, and in it, beneath the calm, something that had been coiled tight for 20 years and was now, finally, beginning to release. "I'm already on my way," he said. He did not say, "How did you get this number?" He did not say, "Are you sure? Are you certain? Are you absolutely positive?" He said, "I'm already on my way," as if he had been packed and ready for years, as if this call had always been the call he was waiting for. He arrived at the estate at 11:47 in the morning. Elara knew the exact time because she had been watching the drive from the window of the east wing, her arm now bound against her chest with a scarf she had knotted herself, her head cleaned and dressed with the contents of the bathroom cabinet, her back straight and her breathing deliberate, counting the minutes the way she had counted everything in this house, carefully, privately, with the knowledge that each one mattered. The car that pulled up was not remarkable, a dark sedan, late model, clean but unpretentious, the kind of car a man drives when he wants to arrive without announcement. But the man who stepped out of it moved differently than he had on the bench outside the coffee shop. The limp was real, she could see that. But the weakness she had observed on the pavement that Tuesday morning was gone. What replaced it was something she had not expected, something that straightened the air around him as he approached the iron gates, something that made the estate's security camera, which Elara knew Viven monitored from her phone, feel suddenly inadequate. Arthur Graywell walked toward the front door of the Voss estate like a man who had a legal right to be there. Because he did. Viven met him in the entrance hall. Elara stood at the top of the stairs, the same spot where Viven had stood 40 minutes earlier, looking down at her broken body with cold arithmetic, and she watched. The entrance hall below her was a theater she had spent 20 years watching from the wings. She knew its acoustics. She knew exactly where to stand, so that her presence was invisible from below, but every word spoken beneath her carried upward with crystalline clarity. She heard Vivien's voice first, smooth, controlled, already performing. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we have an appointment." "We don't," Arthur said. "I'm here on a legal matter pertaining to the estate of Edmund Voss and the prior estate of Clara Voss, née Hargrove. My name is Arthur Greywell. I am the appointed executor of a sealed document, which is now legally required to be opened and read in the presence of the primary beneficiary." A pause. In that pause, Elara heard something she had never once heard from Viven Calloway Voss in 20 years of living inside her carefully constructed world. Silence that was not strategic. Silence that was not a pause for effect. Silence that was something breaking. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Viven said finally, and her voice, that exquisitely controlled instrument, had developed, in the space of that pause, the faintest tremor. "This estate was legally settled years ago. Everything was handled properly. Whatever document you think you have—" "The document I have," Arthur said, with the particular quiet of a man who has never once needed volume to command a room, "was sealed by Clara Voss 14 days before she died. Witnessed by 2 independent parties. Filed with the primary court registry under a provision that prevented it from being opened until specific conditions were met." Another pause. "What conditions?" Viven asked. And here, in this exact moment, the shape that Elara had felt in the dark 2 nights ago, the shape she had known was there before she could see it, finally stepped into the light. "The conditions," Arthur said, "were as follows. The document was to remain sealed until either Elara Voss reached the age of 21, or until evidence of harm to Elara Voss at the hands of a legal guardian was formally documented by a licensed medical professional or witnessed directly by the executor." He opened his briefcase. "I witnessed it directly," he said. "This morning, on a bench outside a coffee shop, when your stepdaughter crouched down to help a disabled man that every other person on that pavement chose to ignore. And I saw, on her forearms, on the visible line of bruising along her collarbone, evidence consistent with repeated physical harm. The briefcase produced a document. Sealed. Old. The wax on its binding dark with age. She's also 21 years old as of 3 weeks ago," Arthur said. "Both conditions have been met simultaneously. The will is now legally required to be opened. Today. In this house. In her presence." Elara came down the stairs. She did not rush. She did not tremble. She descended with the deliberate stillness of someone who had spent 20 years being told she was nothing and had just been handed, in a single quiet exchange, the first concrete proof that the woman who told her so had known all along that the opposite was true. She stepped into the entrance hall. Viven turned, and the expression on her face, the one she could no longer control, the one that had broken through the performance and could not be recalled, was the most honest thing Elara had ever seen from her. It was not anger. It was not calculation. It was the face of a woman watching 20 years of architecture collapse in real time. The face of someone who had built everything, every lie, every bruise, every manipulation, every locked cellar and forged document and falsified medical report, on the assumption that this moment would never come, that the document would stay sealed, that the girl would stay small, that the wall she had built between Elara and the truth was permanent. It was the face of a woman realizing she had miscalculated, catastrophically, irreversibly. "Elara," Viven began. "Don't," Elara said. One word, quiet, final. And Viven, for the first and only time in the history of their relationship, stopped speaking. Arthur Graywell broke the seal at 12:17 in the afternoon in the entrance hall of the Voss estate, with Elara standing 3 feet away and Viven standing 6 feet behind her, like a woman waiting for a verdict she already knew. The document inside was not long. Elara Voss had been a precise woman. Elara would learn this about her mother in pieces over the weeks that followed, the way you learned someone through the archaeology of the things they left behind. She had not used 20 words where 5 would do. She had written what needed to be said, and nothing more. Arthur read it in full. Elara would not remember all of it. She would remember specific lines, specific phrases that burned themselves into her memory with the permanence of things that restructure you. She would remember the part that established her as the sole primary heir to the Voss family trust, not Edmund's estate, which Viven had successfully claimed, but the original Voss dynasty trust, the one that predated Edmund by 2 generations, the one that Edmund himself had only ever been a steward of, worth in total, across assets, holdings, properties, and compounded investments spanning 4 decades, $900 billion. She would remember the part that established that any spouse of Edmund Voss, who could be proven to have caused physical harm to Elara, was to be immediately and permanently divested of all claims to the Edmund Voss estate, meaning not only did Viven have no claim to Clara's trust, she now had no claim to anything she had taken from Edmund either. But the part she would remember most, the clause that Arthur read last, in the same measured voice he had used for everything, as if he had known all along that this moment required steadiness more than drama, was the final provision. Elara Voss had written it in her own hand, a note appended to the legal language in ink that had aged to the color of rust. Arthur read it aloud. To my daughter, whom I will not live to raise. I knew what was coming before it came. I knew the kind of people who circle wealth the way certain creatures circle light. I could not stop it, but I could leave you a door. All you had to do was find the man who would hold it open until you were ready to walk through. If you are reading this, you were kind enough to stop for him. I always knew you would be. You have my heart, my name, and everything that was ever ours. They kept you from it for as long as they could, but they were never going to keep you from it forever. The dynasty was always yours. Come home. Elara did not cry. She had expected to. She had thought, in the abstract way you anticipate your own reactions to, things you cannot fully imagine, that the moment would break her open. That she would weep with the weight of it, the 20 years, the bruises, the cellar, the sold portrait, the forged reports, the thin smile at the top of the stairs. Instead, she felt something she had no existing word for. Something that had been folded so small for so long that when it finally began to expand, it did so slowly, without sound, filling the spaces inside her that had been deliberately emptied over 2 decades of systematic erasure. She felt like a building remembering its own foundations. She turned to look at Viven. Viven was standing exactly where she had been standing when Arthur broke the seal. She had not moved. She had not spoken. The performance was gone, stripped clean, finally, permanently, by the particular acid of being witnessed completely. What remained beneath it was something smaller and more ordinary than Elara had expected. Something that had needed 20 years of architecture to appear as large as it had. The clause, Arthur said, closing the document with the care of someone returning something sacred, triggers an immediate legal review of Edmund Voss's cause of death, the conditions under which his will was filed, and all financial transactions conducted by Viven Calloway Voss in the 18 months preceding and the 12 months following his death. He looked at Viven then, directly, with the particular steadiness of a man who had been waiting 20 years to do exactly this. You will want to contact your attorney, he said. Viven opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in 20 years, in the entrance hall of the house she had stolen, in front of the girl she had spent 2 decades trying to erase, Viven Calloway Voss had nothing to say. And in that silence, enormous, historic, long overdue, Elara Voss stood in the light, coming through the entrance hall windows, and understood, with a clarity that felt like the first clean breath she had taken in 20 years, that the war wasn't over. The claws had ended Vivien's power, but what Viven had done to Edmund, what the legal review was about to uncover, wasn't going to end quietly. Because buried in Arthur Graywell's briefcase, beneath the document he had just read, were 3 other sealed folders. He had not mentioned them. He had not opened them. And when Elara's eyes dropped to the briefcase, when she registered the thickness of what remained inside it, the weight of what had not yet been said, Arthur caught her gaze. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet, that movement said. Not here. Not today. There is more. There is so much more. And Elara Voss, sole heir to a $900 billion dynasty, standing in the wreckage of a life that had been stolen from her, her arm bound against her chest, and her mother's words still ringing in the architecture of her bones, understood that what had just ended was not the story. It was only the door. The room beyond it had not yet been opened, and what was inside it, was going to change everything. Again. She had the name, she had the will, she had the dynasty. But Arthur Graywell's briefcase still held 3 sealed folders, and the legal review of Edmund Voss's death had not yet returned its findings. And Viven Calloway Voss, stripped of her performance, cornered and with nothing left to lose, was the most dangerous version of herself. Part 2 is coming, and the truth inside those folders will make everything that came before it look like the beginning.